Hey guys, tonight we take a slow, winding stroll into the oddly exhausting world of 18th century dinner parties. You know, the kind, long tables, powdered wigs, and soup that stares back at you. But tonight's not just about food. It's about survival. And spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't last the first 10 minutes. Imagine receiving an invitation, not by email, not even by letter, but hand-delivered by a messenger in stockings. The envelope, monogrammed, the seal, wax, the message. More rules than your Wi-Fi router manual. You've just been invited to a formal dinner, and the invitation makes it very clear your presence is tolerated, your punctuality expected, and your knowledge of obscure silverware names assumed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. It all begins with that invitation. You're sitting at home by candlelight, naturally, when there's a knock at the door. A young footman in pristine livery presents you with an envelope that could double as a heraldic document. You open it carefully, trying not to tear the delicate paper. Inside, you find what might as well be a contract of magical binding. The dinner is being held at the estate of Lord Appledrum of West Tynon, Somerset, a man with 5 names and 1 eyebrow. The letter includes a detailed rundown of your arrival window precisely between 6:41 and 6:49 p.m. Appropriate attire, no fewer than 12 specified items, and a reminder to abstain from garlic, strong perfumes, or political opinions. You're warned delicately that seating will be arranged according to your most recent social utility, as judged by a committee of titled individuals who once studied at a place called not actually Oxford, but close enough. Historians still debate whether this sort of social ranking was genuinely respected or just a collective performance. Everyone agreed to pretend was important. The letter ends with a wax seal showing a swan being stabbed by a tulip. This, you're told, is symbolic of what? Unclear. Even at the time, guests would often whisper, is the tulip stabbing the swan, or just giving it an aggressive hug? You try to prepare yourself. You reread the invitation 3 more times. You notice the phrase presence at table is not synonymous with participation and discussion, and begin to worry by the time the day arrives. You're already emotionally drained. You've ironed your handkerchief, practiced your curtsy or bow, and you've memorized the proper response if someone asks how your family's barley crops fared this season. Even though you don't grow barley, before you even get to the estate, you realize the invitation didn't include any form of transportation. That's because guests are expected to arrive via their own carriage. Failing that, on horseback or escorted by someone who does own a carriage, you settle for renting the 18th century equivalent of an Uber, a creaky coach driven by a man who calls you Melody or Melode. Regardless of gender, as the coach rattles along a cobbled road, your stomach churns, not from nerves, but from the strong lavender sachet you stuffed into your coat to mask the smell of horse. You wonder, briefly, if this counts as a strong perfume, and panic. Fortunately, lavender is considered the scent of someone trying too hard, but failing in a socially acceptable way. You arrive at the Estada, sprawling manor of stone and glass, complete with a reflecting pond and at least one swan that is either decorative or malevolent. The coachman shouts your name dramatically, and you are led up steps that are much too wide for normal human stride. The entire entryway smells like expensive furniture, polish, and family secrets. Inside, a butler who appears to be 103 years old and smells faintly of varnish asks for your name and reads it aloud, followed by your alleged noble connections. You hear yourself described as descended from the glorious cheese merchants of Bristol, and you're too startled to correct him. You are now officially at the event. You're shown to the waiting parlor, where you're expected to mingle lightly. There is no music, just the sound of shoes clicking on marble and occasional polite coughing. A woman in a seafoam green gown asks you if you read the latest pamphlet on the uses of turnip pulp. You nod enthusiastically because saying no might get you reassigned to the children's table, worse, to a lower tier of conversation. This is the calm before the culinary storm. But already you're aware that you've entered a world where eye contact is a weapon, posture is a ranking system, and every word you say can and will be used against you in gossip. As you nibble nervously on a wafer you're not sure is edible, you think to yourself, this is going to be a very long night. You are ushered gently but with urgency into the grand dining room by a footman who moves with the grace of someone trained to avoid making eye contact with people like you. The room itself feels like a museum that accidentally swallowed a chandelier factory. Heavy drapes frame each towering window, and on the walls hang portraits of people who look deeply disappointed in your very existence. The long dining table gleams, polished within an inch of its life, and it's set with enough silverware to perform open-heart surgery on a roast. You count no fewer than 5 forks, one of which is so tiny it might actually be a trap. Your name is scribbled on a card placed by your seat, hand-lettered by someone whose calligraphy suggests both elegance and passive aggression. You're seated somewhere near the middle, which is not bad, until you realize that being in the middle means being watched from all angles. A dinner theater actor without a script or talent. To your left is Lady Enid, whose perfume arrives before she does. To your right, the Honorable Frederick Grimp, a man who looks like he was born with a monocle. Frederick greets you by referencing your second cousin's unfortunate poetry collection. You laugh politely, then realize you don't have a second cousin. Not one with poetry, anyway. Soon, the host enters, Lord Appledrum himself. He's wearing so much lace that you briefly wonder if he's lost in a giant cupcake. With a practiced nod, he raises a hand, and all 20 guests rise in perfect synchrony, like a cult that worships silver polish. You're a beat behind. Already, your failure to rise with the others marks you as someone whose ancestors probably didn't fight in the Tulip Rebellion of '03. Then come the toasts. Oh, the toasts. You're expected to lift your glass precisely when everyone else does, and only when everyone else does. You are not supposed to drink during the toast, or after, or before, or unless someone of a higher social rank makes eye contact, nods slightly, and mutters something vaguely resembling your name. This is a game of etiquette chicken. It's lukewarm, thick, and green. Not pea soup green, more like pond where regrets go to drown green. You don't ask what's in it. No one does. Asking questions is frowned upon unless you are a baronet or above. Lady Enid takes one sip and murmurs, "Ah, just like Versailles." You don't know what Versailles tastes like, but you nod appreciatively and try not to inhale any floating bits. Fun fact, in the 18th century, soup was both a social equalizer and a judgment tool. If you slurped, you were vulgar. If you were too quiet, you were snobbish. Historians still debate whether the proper technique involved a diagonal spoon approach or the more controversial side, dip and sip. The second course is something roasted and foul-shaped. Could be duck, could be something that once quacked near a duck. A servant announces it with a French flourish you don't understand. You reach for the wrong knife. Lady Enid gasps, and somewhere, a violinist practicing in a nearby parlor hits a sour note as if to mark your shame. Meanwhile, Frederick Grimp is in full lecture mode. He's talking about the Enlightenment like he personally invented it, tossing around names like Rousseau and Voltaire as if he plays croquet with them every Saturday. You nod slowly while chewing something that might be a candied turnip halfway through your attempt to discreetly spit out a bone. The conversation shifts to wigs. Not politics, not war, not even fashion trends. Wigs, apparently powdered wigs, are now being made with a blend of yak hair and desperation. The table debates the merits of various pomades. One guest insists on crushed pearls. Another swears by bear grease. You laugh too hard at a joke involving hair tonic and the Archbishop of Canterbury. The table goes quiet for a moment too long. You've misjudged the tone. Again, here's something you didn't expect at formal dinners like this. The cutlery is swapped out between every course by a squad of synchronized servants who appear. Replace your utensils with silent efficiency and vanish. It's like a magic trick, except the illusion is that you're supposed to know how to use any of them. At some point, you try to excuse yourself to use the bathroom. Big mistake. There are no bathrooms. Not in a way you're thinking. There is a retiring room, which involves a great deal of lace, footmen, and a bowl of mysterious water. No one actually uses it for its supposed purpose. In truth, guests often just stand in there, breathe deeply, and try to remember which spoon they're on. You return to the table, flustered and slightly damp from splashing your face with rosewater, only to find the third course already underway. It's a pie, you think, except it's savory and steaming, and it contains both seafood and raisins. Lady Enid looks at you, tilts her head, and whispers, "Don't worry, dear. You'll get used to it after the 4th or 5th marriage." You have no idea what she means, but you respond with a vague quite. Here's your one academic sidebar. Historians still argue whether 18th century dinner etiquette evolved primarily from the French court or was a reaction to it. The layering of cutlery, for example, may have started as a way to mock French excess before becoming, well, this dessert finally arrives. You breathe a sigh of relief, only to discover that dessert includes 7 items, each more confusing than the last. One of them is a molded jelly shaped like a sleeping baby. Another smells aggressively of cloves. The most dangerous is a dish called tipsy cake, which is 80% alcohol and 20% regret. As the final plates are cleared, you hear the faint clink of a small bell. This means it's time to leave the table in gendered procession, with men escorting women in order of social standing. You are paired with a woman named Beatrice, who informs you without prompt that she collects teeth. Human teeth. Only ones with stories, she adds. You've survived dinner. Barely dot, and just as you think the ordeal is over, a harpsichord begins to play, and Lord Appledrum announces that the drawing room is now open for postprandial activities. You smile weakly and try not to cry. The drawing room is how do we put this delicately endurance test in wallpaper form. Every square inch is covered in florals, filigree, and a persistent sense of inherited trauma. You are gently herded in still linked arm in arm with Beatrice, who is now explaining the difference between conversational teeth and trophy teeth. You wish you could unhear it, but alas, here you are. A fire crackles in the enormous hearth, more for ambience than warmth. It's July, after all. Around the room, clusters of guests have already formed like clots of silk and powdered disapproval. The men position themselves near the port decanter. The women hover near a fainting couch that appears to exist solely for sighing theatrically. You're offered a small glass of something dark and mysterious. It smells like raisins and colonialism. You nod politely and accept it, instantly regretting your decision when it sets your throat on fire and your soul gently unsimmer. Someone murmurs, "Excellent claret," as if that explains the burning dot post-dinner. Conversation in the 18th century isn't exactly small talk. It's more of a stylized duel with vocabulary. The topics range from new scientific theories, most of which involve phrenology, to gossip about the Prince of Wales' newest horse. You make the mistake of mentioning you once read a book, and now you're stuck in a one-sided discussion with a baron who insists the moon is filled with geese. Historical side note: many aristocrats genuinely believed in hollow earth theories and moon creatures. This wasn't fringe science, it was dinner party material. Historians still debate whether it was sincere belief or just an elaborate bit that got out of hand. You drift toward a card table, thinking it might offer refuge. Instead, you find Lady Enid and two men engaged in a brutal game of Luan old gambling card game that seems to involve both money and emotional blackmail. You sit for one round, lose 2 shillings and a portion of your dignity, then stand back up with an awkward curtsy you definitely weren't supposed to do. Beatrice waves you over again. She's now seated at a harp, strumming out a melancholy tune that sounds like it might be about the death of a goat. "I composed this after a dream about drowning," she tells you, eyes shining. You clap quietly because you're not sure if applauding is appropriate or if it will summon more harps. Suddenly, someone clinks a spoon against a glass. A man in a waistcoat embroidered with pineapples stands up. He's about to recite a poem. Of course he is. The poem is long, very long. It includes multiple references to the Aegean Sea, a woman named Clotilde, and at least one metaphor involving a serpent of yearning. You begin to dissociate halfway through stanza 4. Around you, guests nod solemnly as though moved. One woman dabs her eye. You suspect it's allergies. Fun fact, 18th century drawing rooms were where reputations were made or ruined. A misplaced comment, a botched anecdote, even an untimely sneeze could alter the course of your social trajectory. And yes, there were known cases of duels being scheduled over insulted odes. You back away slowly, bump into a footman, apologize, and then apologize again for apologizing. The footman says nothing, but you feel judged. You take a seat by the window, trying to look contemplative. This is called retiring, and it's a valid strategy for avoiding participation in both poetry and blood sports, like charades. You stare into the garden, where faint moonlight reflects off a marble statue of something that might be an angel, or might be a large, confused goose. Either way, it's oddly comforting. That is, until someone suggests a game of forfeits. Ah, yes. Forfeits, the 18th century version of party games, where guests perform embarrassing dares in exchange for an item they've forfeited. These games are a staple of after-dinner entertainment and can include things like singing in falsetto, pretending to be a chicken, or reciting romantic verses while balancing a spoon on your head. You pray they skip you. They don't. Your challenge. Recite a line of romantic poetry to a chair. With feeling, you comply. The room laughs. Beatrice claps. Frederick Grimb raises one eyebrow in what might be approval or gas. Either way, you survive. Let's not forget the music. After the games, someone produces a violin, and another guest insists on demonstrating a new waltz from the continent. There is some awkward couple swapping as guests position themselves. You are swept into a slow, stumbling dance with Lady Enid, who has the strength of a lumberjack and the grace of a cat, made entirely of elbows. By now, it's close to midnight. In the corner, Lord Appledrum dozes in a wingback chair, snoring gently and clutching a stuffed pheasant. A servant discreetly places a blanket over his knees. Here's something charmingly odd. 18th century hosts sometimes employed warming pan boys, whose job was to heat guests' beds before they retired. You overhear two guests argue over whether their assigned bed warmer used the proper angle of pan application. Historians are still unclear on the precise technique. You consider making your exit, but etiquette dictates that no one leaves before the hostess gives the signal subtle cough followed by a phrase like, "Well, what a stimulating evening." So you wait and wait. Eventually, the hostess stands. The phrase is uttered. A ripple of relief passes through the room like a gentle wave. You stand too quickly, nearly knock over a vase, and mutter something about how delightful everything was. No one believes you. You are led to your assigned guest chamber. It is the size of a modern studio apartment and contains exactly 0 items of comfort. The bed is made of what appears to be compressed hay and judgment. The wallpaper stares at you. Literally. There are cherubs in the pattern. You attempt to undress discreetly, discovering layers of fastenings, ties, and buttons no modern mortal is meant to face alone. You collapse onto the bed, half-dressed, fully exhausted, and deeply aware that you are expected to attend breakfast in the morning. You're beginning to suspect that surviving this evening was only the beginning. Asterisk. You wake up to the faint creak of floorboards and the distant clatter of china. Your limbs feel as if they were wrestled by a bear overnight, which, given the complexity of your nightwear, isn't far from the truth. The wallpaper cherubs seem to be watching, still unamused. Breakfast is a ritual that somehow makes dinner look like a party. You shuffle into the dining room, where the long table is set with enough silverware to outfit a small army. Each place setting has at least 6 forks, 4 knives, and a spoon whose purpose you cannot even guess. You quietly remind yourself that this is not the time to use your modern fork and spoon skills. Your hostess, Lady Marigold, smiles sweetly and motions you to sit. The conversation is slow and deliberate, punctuated by the clink of porcelain and the occasional gasp at the proper way to butter bread. You notice that some guests dip their toast in tea, while others insist that is barbaric. You sigh quietly with the tea dippers. They look marginally less judgmental. The menu is a parade of dense breads, jams with names you can barely pronounce, and eggs cooked in ways that feel both overly complicated and vaguely suspicious. You try to eat slowly to savor the moment, but mostly you just wish you could fast forward to the coffee. Here's a curious tidbit. Coffee was just becoming popular among the upper classes in the 18th century, and many people debated its effects. Some claimed it was a cure for lethargy. Others believed it could cause hysteria. Historians still debate how much coffee influenced the social energy of the era. But everyone agrees it was a big step up from ale at breakfast. Meanwhile, the servants move silently, replenishing plates and offering fresh cups. You find yourself fascinated by their efficiency and wish you could hire a team like this for your own mornings, just as you start to relax. Lady Marigold announces a small after-breakfast exercise in the garden. You smile politely, knowing this means walking and making light conversation. while secretly wondering if you can feign sudden illness outside. The garden is exactly what you expected: manicured, formal, and filled with more statues than flowers. You try to admire the craftsmanship of a marble cherub holding a basket, but it just looks like a baby plotting world domination. The air smells faintly of lavender and ambition. You're paired with Sir Percival, who proceeds to lecture you on the virtues of horticulture. You nod as he details the medicinal properties of various herbs, wondering if you can sneak away to the maze without offending him. The maze is, thankfully, more confusing than your social situation, so you lose Sir Percival after 3 wrong turns. Here's an eccentric note: many aristocratic gardens featured conversation pits, sunken areas designed to encourage intimate talks. Some were decorated with shells and mirrors to create a feeling of being underwater. Historians debate whether these were meant to relax guests or just confuse them. After the garden stroll, you're invited back inside for a demonstration of the latest invention, a mechanical bird that flaps its wings and sings. It's charming and slightly unsettling, reminding you of a clockwork toy you once had that refused to stop making noise. The morning drifts on with a series of social obligations, introductions, polite laughter, and the occasional awkward compliment about your attire. You start to suspect that the 18th century was a marathon of small talk with very few water breaks. And then, just when you think you can't take another compliment about your exquisite taste in ribbons, the announcement comes. It's time for the midday meal you steal yourself. If dinner was a battle, breakfast and the garden were the warm-up stretches, and lunch promises to be a full contact sport. You take your seat once again at the grand dining table, already feeling the subtle pressure of the midday meal bearing down on you like a cloud of powdered wigs. The room is slightly warmer than before, and the scent of roasted meats and herbs begins to weave through the air, mingling with the faint smell of beeswax from the polished wood. This meal is where the real spectacle begins. Plates arrive piled high with dishes you can barely name, some parts browned to perfection, others suspiciously gelatinous. You watch as the other guests delicately maneuver their forks and knives through layers of meat, root vegetables, and sauces that seem to cling to the plate like clingy friends. You remind yourself to stay calm and remember that manners are the armor you wear here, however uncomfortable. Between bites, you become acutely aware of the complicated choreography required to navigate this meal. There are rules about which fork to use, how to hold your napkin, and the precise angle at which to lift your glass for a sip. At one point, you almost dipped your bread in your water, faux pas that would have been noticed by all, and quietly remembered forever. You catch yourself longing for the simplicity of modern fast food, which, as you recall, didn't exist yet. Instead, the 18th century kitchen has brought out a parade of small courses, fruits, cheeses, and even a mysterious dish known only as potted meats. Historians still debate what exactly was in that potted meat, though many agree it involved more jelly than meat, and probably fewer spices than you'd hope. The conversation flows at a slow and measured pace, revolving around politics, the latest fashions, and whether the new scientific discoveries truly threaten the natural order. You smile politely as the debate over the effectiveness of leeches versus herbal remedies unfolds, wondering if anyone else is secretly rooting for the herbs. A curious fact: it was customary for guests to bring their own personal knives for the meal, as public cutlery was considered unhygienic. This means your utensil choices might reveal your social status or eccentricity. Luckily, your imaginary knife is perfectly ordinary. Amid the formality, there's a subtle humor that you start to appreciate the absurdity of all these rules, combined with the genuine attempt at warmth and camaraderie. You notice Lady Marigold's little sigh when someone inevitably spills a drop of wine or drops a crumb on the floor. Even she isn't immune to the chaos beneath the polished surface. As the meal winds down, a servant offers a plate of sugared almonds and tiny cakes. You wonder how many calories you've consumed, but quickly dismiss the thought where everyone raises their glasses and wishes for health, prosperity, and long life. You clumsily lift your glass, narrowly avoiding a spill, and mutter a quiet cheers to the strange and wonderful world you've just entered. With the last sip, you feel a wave of relief. The meal is over, and there's a brief pause before the afternoon's activities begin. You think about the layers of etiquette you've navigated and can't help but smile at the fact that you survived, even if just barely. You rise from your chair, slightly stiff from hours of sitting in a corset or tight waistcoat, depending on your chosen guise, saying, "Follow the crowd into the garden." The afternoon sun filters through the lush greenery, casting dappled shadows on the gravel paths. It's a peaceful respite after the intensity of the formal meal, but don't get too comfortable. The garden itself is a stage for more subtle social maneuvers and rituals that you'll need to master. The garden party is not just about fresh air. It's a carefully choreographed event where every step you take, every nod or smile can be scrutinized and interpreted. You find yourself in a group discussing the latest trends in botanical curiosities. People collect exotic plants, sometimes even more eagerly than art. Someone mentions the rare tulip mania that swept through Europe decades earlier, a bizarre episode where tulip bulbs were traded like gold. Historians still debate whether it was a financial bubble or just an overhyped flower fad. But you can't help thinking about how weird and wonderful human obsession can be. You wander toward the hedge maze, a favorite spot for secret conversations, and occasionally stolen kisses. The maze is a maze indeed, but more mental than physical. Realize it's easy to get lost in the labyrinth of polite gossip and half-truths that swirl around you. You overhear a snippet about a certain nobleman's strange hobby, collecting rare and sometimes downright odd pets, including a monkey who apparently caused more trouble than the family's servants combined. As you stroll, you notice the delicate fragrance of lavender and rosemary blending with the earthy smell of damp soil and crushed leaves beneath your feet. The ambient sounds of chirping birds and distant laughter create a soft soundtrack that somehow makes the entire setting feel more like a scene from a pastoral painting than a high-stakes social event. Curiously, you spot a small table with refreshments delicate, iced cakes, jellies, and iced waters infused with herbs like rose and mint. This is the time when the hosts show off their wealth and refinement, but you also learn that not all treats were created equal. Some gardens had more exotic ingredients sourced from faraway colonies, while others stuck to more modest fare. The presence or absence of certain fruits could silently indicate the status of the host or their political loyalties. You take a slow sip of your spiced lemonade and reflect on how this moment of calm is a stark contrast to the hectic, noisy streets just beyond the garden walls. Outside, carriages clatter by, street vendors hawk their goods, and children play unsupervised a world apart from this carefully controlled oasis of civility. It strikes you that the garden is a kind of theater, where nature and nurture intermingle. You feel like an actor in a play where the script is unwritten, but every gesture counts. The gentle rustling of the leaves and the soft murmur of voices around you almost lull you into a relaxed trance. No wonder these settings were often chosen for late afternoon walks or philosophical discussions. One last detail to note: some guests carry small smelling salts or aromatic sachets, not only as fashion statements, but also to mask less pleasant odors that linger despite the fresh air. Yes, hygiene was a perpetual challenge even in these refined circles. As the garden party draws to a close, you prepare to return inside, already bracing yourself for the next chapter of this 18th century adventure world that's equal parts elegance and endurance. You step back inside, the cool, shadowed interior offering a reprieve from the warm garden air. The next part of the evening is the most anticipated musical entertainment. An essential feature of any formal dinner in the 18th century. You settle into your seat again, prepared for an experience that is both soothing and slightly intimidating. A small ensemble of musicians begins playing. A delicate blend of harpsichord, violin, and flute filling the room. The music is elegant, flowing, and carefully composed to create an atmosphere of refined calm. You try to imagine yourself as a member of the audience back then, listening to these intricate pieces without the distraction of smartphones or modern noise pollution. Historians still debate how popular these performances were with common people, but in aristocratic circles, music was both entertainment and a marker of social standing. As you listen, you notice the subtle social dance happening around you. Heads nod in polite appreciation, small smiles exchanged between acquaintances. This is not just about the music tastes, about signaling, taste, education, and connections. You're reminded of how today's social media likes and shares mirror those small but significant gestures. During a pause, a curious fact comes to mind. Some guests might have been secretly relieved when the music ended, as it provided a welcome break from the rigid etiquette of dining. After all, the pressure to maintain perfect posture, proper conversation, and even measured bites was exhausting. You imagine how modern-day people might react if asked to endure this level of social scrutiny for hours on end. The performers switched to a lively dance tune, prompting some couples to rise and begin a graceful minuet. You watch as they move carefully across the polished floor, their movements precise and choreographed, far cry from the freestyle dancing of today's parties. This formal dance is not just entertainment, but a ritual of courtship and status. You can almost feel the weight of expectation in every step, as if a single misstep could lead to social disaster. Your attention is drawn to a peculiar detail. The musicians themselves are often precariously balanced between artistry and survival. Many depended on patronage, meaning they had to please the whims of wealthy patrons to keep their positions. There's a fascinating tension between artistic expression and social obligation that resonates even today. Some historians argue this dynamic shaped much of the music's style and content. You take a moment to appreciate the fine contrast between the music's lightness and the heavy gowns and coats everyone is wearing. The fabrics rustle and creak, reminding you that comfort was often sacrificed for appearance. There's something both amusing and admirable in the dedication to fashion, despite the obvious discomfort. As the music winds down, you feel the urge to stretch and relax, but you know The evening isn't over yet. The host will soon call everyone back to the table for dessert. A final challenge before the night ends. You remind yourself that surviving this evening requires not just physical endurance, but social savvy and a good sense of humor. You sip your water quietly, savoring the brief lull, and prepare mentally for the sweet temptations and subtle power plays that lie ahead. You're gently ushered back to your seat as the servants quietly arrange delicate plates of dessert before you. The final course is served in assortment of sugary confections, candied fruits, all meticulously prepared to impress both your taste buds and your social peers. You take a bite, immediately noticing how different these sweets are from your modern-day chocolates and cupcakes. Sugar was still a precious commodity, and every bite was a luxury to be savored, not rushed. As you nibble, you become aware of the subtle but complex rules surrounding dessert. Unlike today's casual sweet endings, here, each item you select and how you eat it carries meaning. There's a kind of unspoken etiquette about which dessert to try first, whether to offer a taste to your neighbor, or how to handle the dainty utensils without offending anyone. You feel like you're in a silent dance where every gesture is scrutinized. Historians still debate how much guests genuinely enjoyed these desserts versus enduring them as part of the spectacle. But you can't help but appreciate the effort and artistry involved, the delicate sugar sculptures, the exotic spices imported at great cost, and the tiny glassware designed just for these sweets. You imagine how a confection like this might be the highlight of a whole week's meals for some. Between bites, your eyes wander to the conversations swirling around you. Talk of politics, theater, and the latest gossip flows in hushed tones, punctuated by polite laughter. You realize that despite the strict rules, the dinner is a living social organism, each guest performing a carefully crafted role. You notice that some guests try a bit too hard, resulting in awkward moments and subtle social rebukes, while others glide through the evening effortlessly. A curious aside, did you know that some guests carried personal scent sachets to discreetly mask the less pleasant odors that were common in crowded rooms? Bathing was not an everyday luxury, and rooms often smelled faintly of musk, wood smoke, and unfortunately washed bodies. The sachets added a touch of personal fragrance that might save you from social embarrassment. The sweetness of the desert is calming, and you find your eyes growing heavier as the candles flicker and the soft murmur of voices blends into a soothing background hum. This is the perfect moment where the evening's formalities begin to blur, and you start to feel a quiet connection to those long-past diners who probably also wished for the comfort of a warm bed. As the host thanks everyone and the evening starts to wind down, you reflect on the sheer effort and endurance required to survive such a dinner. The layers of clothing, the strict manners, the constant vigilance over what to say and do. It's no wonder historians describe these events as both exquisite and exhausting. You realize you've been immersed in a world where patience, poise, and subtle humor were just as important as the food on the table. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of centuries lift slightly as the night draws to a close. Soon, you'll retreat to your own comfortable space, far removed from the grand dining halls of the 18th century, but richer in stories and experience. The evening's formalities may be ending, but your experience isn't quite over yet. After dessert, you're invited expected to the drawing room for a final social ritual, polite conversation, often called the after-dinner talk. You find yourself settling onto a plush settee, the ornate upholstery soft beneath you, but a bit stiff from lack of use. Around you, groups of guests cluster, voices lowered to gentle murmurs, discussing everything from the latest operas to philosophical debates. You quickly realize this phase is less about relaxation and more about maintaining your social capital. Every word, every laugh, and every raised eyebrow is a calculated move in a subtle game. You remind yourself of how exhausting it must have been to stay on for so long, constantly aware of your manners and image. This is an era before Netflix or casual hangout socializing was both work and entertainment. One fascinating fact is that these conversations were often punctuated by toasts to absent friends, the monarch, or abstract ideals like liberty or virtue. The toasts required perfect timing and a bit of rhetorical flair, or you risked being labeled dull or disrespectful. You try imagining yourself raising your glass and delivering a smooth, witty toast without sounding like a nervous wreck. Among these refined exchanges, you overhear snippets of gossip, often the most eagerly awaited part of the evening. There's talk of a recently uncovered scandal involving a noble's secret debt, which seems to momentarily lighten the mood. You sense that beneath all the formality lies a shared human desire for amusement and connection, much like today's social gatherings, just wrapped in layers of powdered wigs and silk. Curiously, some historians still debate whether these after-dinner sessions were truly enjoyable or just a polite obligation that everyone endured with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Regardless, you appreciate how these rituals helped maintain the complex social fabric of the time. As the evening stretches on, you notice the gradual shift in energy. The once animated conversations become softer. Guests begin to yawn discreetly. and the room's glow dims as the candle flames burn low. You feel the pull of your own modern bedtime rituals and realize that surviving a formal dinner in the 18th century required not only physical stamina, but a mental resilience that we rarely think about today. You glance at the clock whore, imagine what time it might be in. Think how grateful you are for your cozy, less formal nighttime habits. Still, there's something oddly comforting about the predictable rhythms of this grand social dance. You close your eyes for a moment, imagining the rustle of silk and the murmur of polite voices fading into the quiet night, just when you think the evening might be winding down. There's one final tradition you hadn't fully prepared for, the grand farewell. Standing up, you smooth your clothes and prepare to navigate the maze of formal goodbyes. This is its own performance, enough warmth to seem genuine, but not so much as to appear desperate. You're expected to thank the host, exchange pleasantries with fellow guests, and demonstrate impeccable grace despite the hours of standing and socializing. You remind yourself how physically demanding this could be, especially in those heavy fabrics and towering wigs. Imagine balancing powdered hair and corsets while bowing deeply multiple times. Definitely not a workout you'd sign up for willingly today. Historians often note how these intricate social rituals reinforced class distinctions, ensuring that only those well-versed in the dance could move comfortably among the elite. You shuffle through the crowded room, exchanging the expected good evenings and until next times. The ritual is slow and drawn out, which means you can't simply make a beeline for the door as soon as your thank yous are done. Instead, you're gently corralled into lingering conversations or brief one-on-one chats that test your conversational stamina even further. A quirky fact to ponder: some guests carried small mirrors hidden in their pockets or fans, not just for vanity, but to check their makeup and wig after hours of wear. After all, smudged rouge or a crooked curl could be socially disastrous. You find yourself grateful for modern conveniences like mirrors in every bathroom and hair dryers as you finally make your way to the exit. You notice the cool night air brushing against your face. It's a refreshing contrast to the warm, heavily scented rooms you've been in all evening. You breathe deeply, feeling a sense of relief mixed with accomplishment. Surviving such an event is no small feat. It's like completing a marathon of etiquette and endurance. You can't help but chuckle to yourself, imagining explaining this whole ordeal to a modern friend. So, I just spent 4 hours pretending to be a perfectly poised statue while eating fancy food and discussing politics. Fun times. In truth, you're thankful for your simpler, less formal social routines. But there's a strange charm in the idea of these elaborate rituals connecting people across centuries. You pause for a moment, savoring the calm night and the soft echo of distant footsteps. Soon, you'll be back in your own bed, free from corsets and complicated cutlery, ready to drift off peacefully. But for now, you take one last look back at the grand house, imagining the stories and secrets contained within its walls. You step into the cool night, the grand house fading behind you as you begin your walk home, or rather, to wherever your comfortable bed might be. The streets are quieter now, lit by flickering gas lamps, casting long shadows, slick with evening dew. You realize how different travel was. Back then, no cars, no streetlights beyond these feeble flames, and certainly no late-night rideshares to whisk you home after a long event. Walking slowly, you become aware of every sound, the distant clip-clop of a horse's hooves, the rustle of leaves, even the occasional shout or bark echoing faintly through the night. You think about how perilous even a simple stroll could be after dark in the 18th century, when city streets were often poorly lit and less safe than today. It's easy to see why many guests would arrange carriages or have servants escort them home. One amusing tidbit you remember is how some pedestrians carried small lanterns not just for visibility, but as status symbols, often ornately decorated and passed down through families. The glow from these tiny lights was meant to announce their presence and wealth, much like flashing headlights in modern traffic. You chuckle at the thought of navigating crowded streets with a glowing lantern while balancing powdered wigs and corseted dresses. Historians still debate how safe these night walks truly were. Some suggest the dangers have been exaggerated in popular culture, while others argue that city crime was a genuine concern. Regardless, you're thankful for your well-lit modern sidewalks and the convenience of smartphones with flashlights and GPS as you continue walking. You can't help but reflect on how much the evening's formal dinner was a whole world away from the casual meals you're used to. From the heavy, complicated clothing to the precise table manners and endless small talk, it's clear that attending such an event required preparation, patience, and a touch of performance art. You find yourself wondering how many people actually enjoyed these dinners versus enduring them out of obligation. Surely, some found joy in the company and ritual, but others probably counted the minutes until they could finally leave. You feel a kinship with anyone who has ever suffered through a dull party or awkward gathering as you near your own door. The familiar sights and smells of home wrap around you like a warm blanket. The quiet, simple comfort of your personal space feels like a reward after the evening's elaborate dance. You realize that while history often glamorizes the past. The everyday realities, especially in social settings, could be quite the challenge. You pause for a moment before entering, savoring the peaceful contrast. The world inside this old, formal dinner might have been dazzling and refined, but your world offers something far more valuable: ease and rest. You settle into the familiarity of your home, but your mind is still swirling with images of that grand 18th century dinner party. The contrast between then and now feels almost surreal. The idea of preparing your own elaborate outfit, from powdered wigs to delicate lace cuffs, sounds exhausting, like getting dressed up for an opera that lasts all night. But without the intermissions or snacks you actually enjoy, you start thinking about the food itself. Those multi-course meals weren't just about eating, they were performances. The dishes were extravagant, often combining sweet and savory flavors in ways that seem strange to your modern palate. Imagine biting into a pie filled with meat and fruit together, or sipping on a soup that's as thick as a stew, spiced with exotic ingredients that had just started to trickle in from faraway lands. Historians still debate how much the average person of that era actually ate at these feasts versus the lavish display for guests. You picture the chefs working tirelessly in the kitchens, juggling dozens of dishes while dealing with unpredictable fires and primitive ovens. It's like an early version of today's chaotic cooking shows, but with fewer safety regulations and the etiquette around food. You would need to master everything from how to hold your fork and knife just right, to when it was acceptable to blow on your soup without scandalizing the whole room. If you accidentally reached for the wrong glass or used a spoon incorrectly, well, that could be social death. The pressure alone could make anyone lose their appetite. Here's a quirky fact. Some guests carried tiny personal spittoons at the table for discreetly disposing of unpleasant tastes or food bits, keeping the atmosphere clean. It's hard not to imagine the sing gentlemen and ladies delicately excusing themselves to avoid offending others, all while trying not to gag quietly. You chuckle, imagining yourself fumbling through these rituals, your modern ease replaced by awkwardness. It's a reminder that every generation has its own strange customs, some of which future historians might find just as baffling as you find theirs. You take a slow breath and let yourself sink deeper into the comfort of your present-day life, where dinner is usually as simple as clicking an app or throwing something in the microwave. The sheer complexity of an 18th century formal dinner feels less like a charming tradition now and more like a long, exhausting endurance test. You're beginning to feel the weight of all the rules and rituals from that 18th century dinner settling in your mind. And you can't help but wonder about the conversations that must have filled the room. Back then, chatting at the table wasn't just about small talk, was a carefully choreographed dance of wit, gossip, and coded messages, all wrapped up in layers of politeness and subtlety. You imagine yourself trying to keep up with the fast-paced exchange of ideas, jokes, and compliments, while making sure not to offend anyone or accidentally reveal a scandal. Remember that awkward moment you had last week when you sent a text to the wrong group? Multiply that by 100, and you might start to get the idea. Interestingly, some historians argue about whether these conversations were genuinely meaningful or just elaborate performances designed to maintain social hierarchy. Were people actually interested in the topics, or was it more about signaling status and keeping up appearances? You decide. It's probably a bit of both, like a really intense, high-stakes reality show, but with powdered wigs. One odd detail you recall is the use of coded language during meals, phrases that sounded innocent but carried hidden meanings understood only by the inner circle. It's like a secret menu of words that could flatter, insult, or hint at alliances without anyone else catching on. You smile at the thought of modern-day equivalents, like inside jokes or meme references that fly over the heads of anyone outside your friend group. As the conversation drifts through politics, art, and the latest scientific discoveries, you realize just how much knowledge and poise was expected from each guest. You'd have to brush up on everything from the latest philosophical debates to current fashions and foreign affairs. No pressure, right? The sheer mental stamina required to navigate this social labyrinth is almost exhausting to think about. Yet, somehow, people managed it night after night, often with a glass of wine in hand and a well-practiced smile. You find yourself grateful for your casual chats and easy dinners, where the most complicated topic might be what show to binge-watch next. This glimpse into the social intricacies of a formal or 18th century dinner reminds you that beneath the glitter and grandeur, these events were also intense exercises in human connection, status, and survival, just with a lot more lace. By now, your mind might be wandering to the music that would have filled those grand dining halls. Picture this: a small ensemble of musicians tucked away in a corner, playing delicate harpsichords, violins, and flutes. The melodies are light, soothing, and designed to blend into the background rather than steal the spotlight. It's the kind of sound that gently nudges conversation along, rather than demanding your full attention. You might be surprised to learn that live music was actually a necessity to cover up the less pleasant noises of the evening, the scraping of silverware, the muffled coughs, or the occasional clumsy servant dropping a tray. Historians still debate whether the music was truly appreciated or simply tolerated as part of the package. And there's a quirky, detail about these musicians. Some were actually recruited for their ability to keep a steady rhythm so that the entire dinner flowed smoothly, like a carefully choreographed dance. Imagine being a harpist, knowing that one wrong note could throw off the timing of when the next dish appeared or when the guests shifted topics. It's like the ancient version of a DJ controlling the vibe, but with strings and woodwinds. You imagine yourself sitting there, eyes half closed, letting the gentle music wash over you as you try to stay upright in your rigid chair. The contrast between the soft tunes and the formal atmosphere feels almost comical. You'd probably be the one secretly tapping your foot when no one's looking. Here's a fun curiosity. In some wealthy households, they had special dinner bells to signal the start and end of courses, and even the transition between conversation topics. It's like an old-school notification system, minus the buzz and beeps of your phone. As the night wears on, the music slows, conversations soften, and the energy gradually winds down. You'd be forgiven for thinking this is the moment you might finally relax. But no, you still need to maintain perfect posture and avoid any yawns. The dance of manners continues, right up until the final toast. Thinking about it now, you're probably glad your evening dinners don't require that level of discipline. But it's fascinating to imagine being part of that elegant, delicate performance, complete with music, whispers, and the occasional clink of a glass. As the dinner finally comes to an end, you imagine the grand farewell ritual's slow, graceful exit where every guest stands and exchanges formal thanks and compliments, often followed by a delicate dance of curtsies and handshakes. You're already exhausted just thinking about it. Remember that feeling after a long meeting when everyone stands up at once and you just want to escape. Multiply that by 100. In the 18th century, this wasn't just about saying goodbye. It was a final chance to make an impression. Order. Historians still discuss whether these goodbyes were heartfelt or just another part of the performance. Another interesting fact is that after such formal dinners, it wasn't uncommon for guests to continue the evening with more casual gatherings, sometimes even dancing or small parties inside rooms. So, the pressure to be perfect at the table was just the first act in a much longer evening. You also think about the servants, who by now have been quietly observing, ready to clear the table, bring refreshments, and clean up all without disrupting the delicate atmosphere. Their work was essential, yet invisible. Much like the Wi-Fi behind your streaming video, critical but unnoticed when done well. By the time you finally rise from your chair, you feel the stiffness in your legs, the slight headache from all the effort to stay composed, and maybe even a bit of relief that you survived. You remind yourself that for all its challenges. This formal dinner was a social event that shaped relationships, culture, and even politics. As you settle back into your comfortable modern routine, you might find it comforting to know that while you probably wouldn't survive one night at a formal 18th century dinner, you do have the luxury of relaxing, being yourself, and maybe even snacking while you binge watch your favorite shows. Now, as the evening winds down, let yourself sink into the calm of your own space. Imagine the soft glow of candlelight fading, the gentle hum of the world outside your window, and the quiet comfort of knowing you're safely tucked away from powdered wigs, strict etiquette, and endless courses. Breathe deeply, feel the days. Worries melt away, and allow the slow, steady rhythm of your own heartbeat to guide you toward rest. You've traveled back in time, learned the quirks and customs of a world long past, and now it's time to return to your peaceful present. Sleep well, and dream of simpler dinners, ones where the only rule is to enjoy your food and company without a single powdered wig in sight. Now, dim the light further and feel the softness of the quiet night envelop you like a warm, gentle blanket. Let your breathing slow to a calm rhythm, deep and even. As the thoughts of elaborate dinners and powdered wigs fade into the distance, imagine yourself in a peaceful garden where soft shadows play under the moonlight and the air carries a faint scent of blooming flowers and fresh earth. The world is still, serene, and safe. There is comfort in this quiet moment, a pause from the busy pace of life. You are here, present, resting in the calm. Let each breath carry away any lingering tension, and with every exhale, feel your muscles release their hold. Your mind drifts gently like a leaf floating down a lazy stream, unburdened and free. You have traveled through time, witnessed customs and rituals that once shaped lives, and now you return to your own space, your sanctuary. This is a place where you belong, where you can surrender to rest without worry or effort. The world will wait for you, calm and patient, as you take this moment to renew yourself. Sleep will come softly, like a lullaby sung by the stars themselves. Rest easy, knowing you are safe and cared for. Tomorrow awaits with new adventures, but for now, let yourself drift, peaceful and calm.